Please welcome Mr. Brad Jupp. Thanks, Brad.
Is that too loud? I haven't been called a loner in a long time, and I actually don't feel very alone in this audience. So I'm going to ask, first of all, that we say good afternoon to one another, and that we greet each other. I come to you as somebody from the Department of Education, but also as somebody who has spent 25 years in the Denver Public Schools, 20 of which were as a teacher and a union leader, and 5 of which were as a senior administrator who was working feverishly with Superintendent Michael Bennett to try and propel our school system to an escape velocity out of School District 1.0 to, I hope, School District 1.1 or School District 1.2. What I'd like to do is to talk to you today, though, about how we can use data, how our educators can use data, and how we can begin to think about our school systems from a government 2.0 perspective. And in order to do that, what I'd like to do is to frame a problem not based on my experience as somebody in the Department of Education, but as a leader in the Denver Public Schools. You see, in 1990, we had about 6,100 kindergartners. Now, we didn't have a very sophisticated data system, so the information I'm going to give you is something that we've cobbled together with the help of a lot of different people from a lot of different organizations. But in 2008, what we did was we asked how many of the 6,100 students we entered into kindergarten had a BA degree. Now, we were unable to take the 6,100 kids and to track them across that 16-year trajectory or 18-year trajectory. What we could only do was to look at mismatched cohorts because the data systems don't allow us to make the kinds of longitudinal analysis that you imagine. But what we found was that in a cohort that started at 6,100 students, 18 years later, we had netted about 820 BAs. Now, what I would tell you about Denver Public Schools is that that's probably a set of statistics that are not radically different from any of the other 66 largest school systems that serve about 45% of the students that go to our public school systems. So that rate of return is perhaps marginally better or even worse, tragically below it. The notion that what we're doing is bringing 6,100 students in and seeing only about 700 students come out at the end is stunning when you consider where we are in trying to create our nation as a global competitor. You all should think about the BAs and the advanced degrees that you have in relation to that statistic and to ask ourselves, what are we going to be able to do to create government 2.0 if what we have is citizenry 1.0? And we're going to come back to that problem at the very end when I'm going to ask for 2 things of you. I'm going to ask for you for some confidence and for some commitment. But let me first describe to you what it is in the Department of Education that we're thinking about and talk about it in relation to data systems, data use, and the reforms that we imagine. The Department of Education is in a remarkable point in its own history where, because of the Recovery Act, we have $100 billion that we're investing towards 4 priorities. Those 4 priorities include making sure that we are not losing jobs in our schools in this critical time, but they also include the following 4 policy priorities. We want to turn around the lowest performing schools in our system. We want to make sure that we are bringing in the best people to teach and to lead in our schools. We want to make sure that we have the kinds of standards and assessments that are appropriate for a 21st century school system, and we want to invest in our data systems so that they're able to provide those educators and the parents and the students that are served in those schools with the best possible information. And we have brought these 4 priorities forward through a number of programs. As we talk about them, one of the things I'm going to signal toward at the end of our presentation is Race for the Top, or Race to the Top, rather, which is, I think, one of the most innovative government programs that I can think of, in part because it begins to get away from the false dilemma of governing from top down or bottom up, and we'll talk about that as we close. Now, what I'd like to do is to first talk about data systems. The data systems that we have in our public school systems, at least if we look backwards over our shoulder, are remarkably primitive. If you go to where I was in Denver Public Schools, we were unable, for instance, to connect information about a 3- and a 4-year-old through their kindergarten, and then we were unable to connect the kindergarten experience through to their first grade experience, and then we were unable to connect their kindergarten experience with any information about what they were able to know and do as children until they took a state standards test at the beginning of their 3rd grade. That then gave us a body of information that actually is remarkably consistent and pretty useful all the way up through 11th and 12th grade, but when they complete 12th grade, they then fall off the map and then reappear on an entirely different data set that's maintained by people in higher education. So the story I told you about tracking children from kindergarten through to the acquisition of a BA is a story where you are actually being asked to jump across multiple data systems simply to get information that's necessary. So as a Department of Education, what we are asking folks to invest in part, is the modernization of those data systems. But to modernize those data systems is not by any means the only thing we can ask people to do, because if all they're doing is collecting the kind of data that we've been collecting over the last 10 or perhaps 20 years, we're not going to be able to do much more with it, because all we have with the current standards and assessment systems that we're currently using is a relatively crude understanding of what children can know and can do in a relatively crude set of subjects: language arts, math, reading, writing, math, maybe if we're lucky a little bit of science. These are not the kinds of skills that are going to be expected of students if they're going to be college or career ready. These are not the kinds of skills that are going to be necessary for students to compete in the global economy that you guys are all trying to push us forward to. So what we have to do is to modernize not only our data systems, but also the kinds of data that we're collecting about students. Finally, we're also going to have to begin to make the connection, something that's not done almost anywhere in the United States at this moment, to connect that data not only to schools, but also to the individuals that work in them, to be able to use that information to see whether or not the principals and the teachers that serve these children are making the kinds of differences that we would hope they would make, so that we're able to use that information in real time to support not only the advancement of what the students know, but what the teachers and the principals are able to know and do with those students as well. Now, if you read my bio, one of the things you'll discover that I did about 2000, 2002, 2004 was to institute or help institute a pay-for-performance system as a union leader in Denver, in which individual teachers were given pay increases based in part on the results they got as individual teachers with the students that they taught. This was a huge breakthrough at the time. I would tell you from the vantage point that I'm at right now that it was directionally correct, but by no means the best practice. What it did do, I think, that was fundamentally important was to move away from a system in which teachers were pigeonholed into about 84 different salary cells, and toward a system where teachers became their own individual reference points in a compensation system, so that teacher A built her own professional salary package and teacher B built her own professional salary package. This kind of thinking was only possible with both the data systems to be able to connect students to their performance information and teachers to their student information. Did we get it all right in Denver? By no means. Is it the kind of thing that the Department of Education would endorse heartily? No. What the Department of Education would say is directionally correct, but still needs a lot of improvement. I bring this to you, though, as a tangible example of the kinds of things that you can begin to do with data systems. What I want to talk about briefly is data use, because the systems themselves are not meaningful until you begin to expect the folks who are using them to make wise and intelligent use of them. Part of what we're going to have to do with our teachers, our principals, our students, and our parents is to make sure that they have access to this data and that they're supported in its thoughtful use. This means that the information is going to be used in a number of ways, whether it's advancing kids in real time instead of advancing them at the end of every one-year cycle that we have been maintaining since pre-agrarian times. We call them grades. Or whether it means making compensation decisions or professional development decisions for the adults in our system based on what the adults know and can do and the results that they get with the students that they teach. The Department of Education is interested in seeing other school systems break through and follow in the direction that we've done in Denver, and that those school systems are able to advance our technologies in our school systems so that they are more along this road. And I think this gives me the right place to begin to close down by talking to you about Race to the Top, a program in which what we're doing, instead of telling the school systems what they must do, instead of as government mandating a single set of reforms, or instead of doing what government does in many cases, which is to keep its hands off how a local school system could do its business and saying, just do what you can. What we're saying is, we'll give you a signal to what the direction is, and what we'll expect you to do is to compete to see who can reach that direction as quickly as possible and as thoughtfully as possible. And it's frankly one of the things that I'm most proud to have participated in the 30 years or so that I've been involved in this sector, to actually see somebody take this kind of energy and to do something other than force folks to do something that they're not sure that they know is right, or to expect them to get it right independently on their own. Now, by way of closing, what I'd like to do with this climate of government 2.0 in front of us is to say two things. The first is, we need your commitment to help us as a sector advance. There are portions of the Race to the Top grant program that are going to require advanced partnerships on the parts of state and local education authorities, and being able to participate in those partnerships will help advance them. In addition, there's a segment of the Race to the Top grant program that allows nonprofits to enter into this field and to begin to do their work as long as it's able to help us advance along these directions. Now, if your commitment is one thing, the second thing I want to do is to ask your confidence. If I learned anything in Denver Public Schools, it is that there is a public sense that we can count of our own children for the best, but for other people's children, we have to let them fend for themselves. And I would argue in closing that one of the things that permits the intolerable statistic that I began framing this presentation with, is in fact a public tolerance. A public tolerance to say that for other people's children, going through the school system until the end of 10th grade, or going through the school system and getting a high school diploma, that's just good enough. And what I'm going to urge you to do by way of closing is to think about how you can begin to place your confidence, not in your school system, but in those students. Place your confidence in those students so that you can see in them the same sort of moral principle that you would in your own children. It is that kind of confidence that we hope then circles back to your commitment to invest in us, to invest your time, your energy, and your support. Thank you very much.